My name is Johanna Linder and I work for Doctors Without Borders as the regional responsible for the supply chain in the sub-Saharan region in Africa.
Welcome to Logistics.rocks.
Thanks a lot.
And everyone joining Logistics.rocks has to pick a song.
So I have picked Come Sail Away with Styx. I love it, and it's including a transport mode, so I thought it suited very well.
So you've chosen a song because both because you like it, but also because it has some sort of connection to logistics transportation.
It is one of my favorite songs, but I thought it was a great one.
Yeah, good. So we will add that to the playlist, of course. You can find the playlist on Spotify, as always. And we've known each other for a couple of years. I've interviewed you for another podcast a few years ago, but that was in Swedish. And since then you were you had just come back from Liberia during the Ebola outbreak.
Yeah.
And then you worked in Sweden in e-commerce for a few years.
I took a break from the field, yes.
Yes, but now you're back inside Doctors Without Borders, but you do something else now.
Yes, so since 2 years back, I started in the headquarters in Brussels. So I am in a more strategic position where I'm the overall responsible of the supply chain in 4 different countries. It's pretty much the same kind of a job, but just on a different distance and a different perspective. But it's great to continue to work and be the kind of support that I needed when I was in the field. So it's just a swap of roles. And what is fantastic in MSF is that we often swap. So you can be the boss of your boss and the opposite way around. And so
MSF is the French acronym, yes.
Sorry, so Médecins Sans Frontières. It's a French organization from the beginning, and then of course we call it Doctors Without Borders, but it's quite a long word. So yeah, I would prefer if I talk about the organization throughout the interview to just use the acronym of MSF.
MSF, but now you know.
Yeah, now you know.
So you've worked on both sides of this fence, and I know that you have worked also since our last interview. You worked in different types of projects, both long-term projects and also these sort of catastrophic response teams.
Yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit about the difference between those two, because your organization is part of both of those types?
So MSF started as an emergency organization. Then we have built up a lot of knowledge and we are starting to see trends. So what we are trying to do today is to continue to answer to emergency response, but with much more knowledge behind. So the idea is that you can answer to an emergency without being in emergency mode yourself. Then we are having capacity and knowledge to work also with project of choice. So we have a couple of project of choices in countries where there is repetitive problems. So I think the best example is the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, where we have actually been there for 30 years. And we are having several projects. One project that is one of these emergency response projects that constantly goes out off in the middle of nowhere to meet new cholera outbreaks, measles outbreaks, or vaccination campaigns.
So you have sort of an in-place supply chain organization already there to be able to respond to outbreaks, which of course you cannot plan for, but you know that they will happen, but you don't know exactly where. So you have some sort of staging area in DRC.
Yes, so in each country where we are present, we are having a coordination team that normally depends on the context, but normally they are situated in the capital. It is also important to work with advocacy and working with networking in that country because, of course, we are not there just on our own, so we have to collaborate with the authorities in the country. And from there, so these project of choice is often in collaboration with the Ministry of Health in that country, where they are able to locate a problem, but have not been able to have enough resources or knowledge to intervene. So in most of the time in the capitals, we keep a security stock where we are having certain scenarios where we have prepared for So we have done a pre-analyze of what is normally the recurrent diseases, and we are keeping some stock because these countries are not very easy. The infrastructure, both internationally and nationally, so we can all is quite complex. So we need to also. And the normal answer in MSF is it depends. So it depends on the context, of course, and where we are. Now I am working quite a lot in the African region, but of course we also have a lot of interventions in places like Iraq or Syria or Afghanistan, which has a totally different need. But yeah, we do pre-place stock to be able to answer quickly. And there is this system of kits where there is a kit that is put together with a couple of or quite a lot of different articles that is okay. If you are going for a measles outbreak for X number of people, you bring these number of boxes and you're able to be operational from day one.
It's the same as in any industry.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
I'm really curious because you're part of the non-medical part of MSF. You have, of course, doctors, nurses, and specialists in the medicine part, but then you have the supportive, the supply chain part, for instance, and I think fundraising, things like that. You have a lot of experts working in other fields, but are you able to learn or borrow ideas from, let's say, e-commerce or military logistics, things like that? Or are you looking outside your own domain?
Yeah, we have to. I always explain that supplies has, of course, always been moving since we started in the 70s. The last 10 years, we have started to invest properly in supply chain management as such, looking into the processes and on working on continuous improvement. Myself, I did work in the private sector before MSF. I did 3 years in the field, and then as you said, I went back to the private and now back in MSF. And I do think it's a lot of similarities. The basics of supply chain management is the same wherever you are, and we have different complexities depending on where we are, and both depending on the size of the company or the organization or where you are. Putting a supply chain in place, but the logics are the same. So therefore, there's a lot of things we can learn from each other, and we do really look for a lot of competence outside, and work together with others on these parts to be able to develop the supply chain.
And now you talked about when you have these long-term commitments, like in the DRC, but what happens when there is an Ebola outbreak where you were part of the personnel on the ground, actually ground zero where it happened? How does that situation differ? Because then you're in disaster relief mode. When
you are going as one of the first one in a team to meet an earthquake, for me, my experience has been Ebola and also a quite new refugee situation. Of course, you have to work in a different speed. I think that's the thing that differentiated the most. So we put in place quite different length of missions, as we call it. So that's so when you go on a mission, depends on, again, a lot on things. But if you compare that, I was in South Sudan, which is more of this kind of a static, problematic area, where I was for 1.5 years and able to work with a lot of different emergencies, but on a more stable mode. And compared to Liberia, where I went for 2 months. And for those 2 months, I worked every single day, and I worked almost all the time. The only thing I didn't do, if I didn't work, I was sleeping, and that was it. Because you need to put in place everything. So you are running between the authorities to put in place proper, correct importation procedures. You're running to speak to the airport, the manager of the airport, to ensure that they are having the right material to start to receive a huge amount of material. So you are running around a lot. You have to do a huge amount of recruitment because you have to build up your team. So of course, when things are more settled, you can take it step by step, and we are able to work more with continuous improvement. While in these matters, we have at least 1 or 2 months of pure emergency mood where the operations are number one. And then we try slowly to put procedures.
And it's literally life or death as well.
Yeah, of course.
Every day in that situation. How on a personal level, how do you cope with that? You were there for 2 months. Is that the limit for what you can? Because the mission was longer.
For sure, we were there for I think we closed it 1.5 years after I left. My best way of coping is that we are all there together, so I'm not there on my own, and I do think that's a difference because I traveled a lot on my own in Africa before I started working with MSF. But then you're on your own, and you have to analyze and rethink what you just saw on your own. When you're out with MSF, you are there with a team, and that team are there together. And here is the difference, I think, as well, that when you're in supply or in one of these support units, you are always kind of better off because you're one step out. And I have an enormous respect for the doctors and the nurses that are in daily contact with the patients in these extreme situations where at the beginning, we had, I think we topped that 60 people dying every single day. So you have a possibility to just reflect on a daily basis with people who are going through the same. And that is very precious for me. More precious than when you come home and you have the possibility to speak with a psychologist, which is provided. But for me, it is that moment that we are sharing the situation together.
It's not for everyone, I think, to do this. Everyone can contribute, but in different ways, of course. How would you say a typical response is from a supply chain point of view? Let's say there is a new Ebola outbreak or there is a new sort of outbreak of some disease and you need to respond very quickly. What's the first thing you do as a supply chain coordinator in Brussels?
So the first thing is that we do a quick analyze of what we already have on ground. So that depends again if we are existing already in that country or not. So what are the resources today at this moment that we have? And then I mean both stocks and HR resources. What's the level of competence? How many people do we have? How long are they there for? How much stock do we have? What are the roads like? Where are we in rainy season, in dry season? What are the networks we have on place? So for sure, the first thing we do is to grasp what we have on ground at that very moment.
So you do an inventory.
Precisely,
that's
yeah.
what you do, yeah. And then you deploy resources. Do you have to recruit as well? Or do you have personnel on hand?
We have personnel on hand, and we do try in these emergency interventions to work with experienced staff. So that's also one of these things that we do in the more stable context. Not going to say that we are the reason we are there is not for capacity building, but it is one of the parts of stable context is to send out first mission where they can try in a more stable context and try to learn and develop skills that later on is needed in more tense situations, because you need to have it a little bit more in your spine, what you're going to do and how you're going to act, and know your limits. I think that's the most important when you're going on these kind of interventions, that everyone has their own limits on how much they can work and what kind of things they can do. But you have to know your own limits, because no one else has the time to take care of you at that very moment. You have to take care of yourself. So
would you say that it's comparable to a military response?
I do think there's a lot of similarities. Yeah,
but you need to have the basic organization, you need to have the training, you need to have this sort of reacting without thinking. Mm-hmm. You need to be able to have this sort of level of training, mm-hmm. So that you can respond to different types of insecurities. Mm-hmm. But you know that you will do it in the best way possible. Exactly.
And that's where it's good if you have been in situations before. And we do ask when people are recruited, that it's preferable that they have been in situations before, traveled in countries, and not just been working in a kind of an isolated bubble in Sweden. Maybe it's good if you have, even if it's not together with work or with logistics, that you have been traveling maybe on your own or a bit in places where things are not in extreme order, and that you're able, you know how you will react in a chaotic situation. I did get one of the most experienced people we have in emergency interventions. She told me it was during my time in Liberia, where things were very chaotic. And she said, the more chaotic a situation is, the calmer you have to be. And
that's a personality trait.
It's a personality trait, but it is also, at least for me, what I see is functioning very well in these kind of situations. But you can, of course, work for MSF without ever having to be in these extreme emergency situations, because there's a big need. So we always have the possibility to move people towards that direction they are interested in developing.
If we look at how you because you're very dependent on people, of course, but you're also dependent on technology, and technology is evolving rapidly. As we all know, we have drones, we have 3D printing, we have digitalization, we have better sensors, we have all of these things. How are you foreseeing that MSF can utilize all these fantastic inventions?
Well, of course, there's a lot of areas of utilization. We have been discussing a lot, of course, the 3D printers. And I see a lot of similarities to the shipping in this industry, where you have complex machines far away from where they are produced. So we are having complex machines both in the medical, in the hospitals, of course, but also because we have to provide everything ourselves. Normally we are putting up a hospital in the middle of nowhere, which means we need to be able to provide not just electricity and generators and maybe water pumps, but also we have to be able to maintain the cars ourselves. So there's an enormous amount of articles. It's a huge range from everything from the antibiotic to spare parts for a motorbike. And if we could print a bit more to be able to always answer quickly in a supply chain with a short lead time, because lead time is one of our biggest challenges, that would be a huge improvement. We are, of course, discussing as well the drones. Today we are using it for to send blood samples and tests, because they are not that heavy. But we are also looking into where we could send bigger freights as such. We are doing today from planes. We're doing drop deliveries if necessary. So, of course, to have a bit of more precise delivery would improve a lot of interventions. I do also think when it comes to inventory management, if we are looking into Internet of Things and these parts, there is a lot of development possibilities as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that an industry like the e-commerce industry, you've been working in the e-commerce industry, even though it's a totally different field and totally different way of thinking about who has the demands on my system, who are the customers, and so on. I think we could all learn a lot from an industry which is so data-driven as the e-commerce industry is now becoming. And I think all industries need to be data-driven in some way. Are you seeing that you are also going towards data-driven approach to forecasting, to prediction, things like that?
For sure. Where we are, we're having a lot of visions on these areas. Where we are now, we are still struggling quite a lot with data quality. So that's one of the biggest priorities for us now, is to analyze and find out where we need to invest to ensure that we have data quality. And as soon as we are starting to be sure about that, we would like to put it in to see more, because there is so much information in data, of course. And the more we can see the trends and we are able to forecast. Today we do work with standardization and forecasting, where we try to push all the recurrent items. So I do use the 80-20 rule, like normally 80% is recurrent and predictable. And then we still keep our kind of 20% for the extreme reactivity that is needed in the organization. So that's still a huge amount to be able to use the data for those 80% to standardize and make that supply chain less time consuming and less manual, because today it's quite manual, the systems.
Would you say that if you have this 80-20 relationship between sort of the long-term stable emissions and the catastrophic ones, so where you respond to, would you say that the costs are reversed? Cost per month or per day or per year, that those are the most expensive ones where you don't have these stable organizations?
Well, of course. And I think the one of the biggest things that we did change when we started working with supply chain management, it was to start to build up proper stocks, and we could move over around 70-80% from air to sea. And when you do that, you are much, much more than half in your cost. I think it's often 3, 4, 5 times cheaper to send the majority of your articles by sea or by road. And then you send the items that are necessary to be sent by air, because we do have those ones as cold chain material, dangerous goods, or short shelf life medicine that needs to be moving much faster. But the majority is definitely possible to move in a slower way if you can then work more on prognose and forecast.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And if you look ahead 10-15 years, what would your job look like?
I think we are having a accelerating development in supply chain management in the humanitarian world. Might be the same everywhere, and that you will just recognize this. But what I have seen is that 10 years ago, the ones who was working with supply chain did not have the skills of supply chain in the same level that it is today. Today, the people that we are able to recruit are on a totally different level of competence. So I see that we will be able to move with development in a much, much faster way. And there is the interesting part of humanitarian supply chain is that there is room to be creative. There is already a culture or a context of risk taking. So there is definitely space to try out new things. And we do often do this in extreme emergencies where there is space to try new things to be able to. So in 10 years time, I think it's a bit hard for me to see where we would be. But I do hope that the 80% that I'm talking about is totally automatized, and that we are able to use our competence, our creativity for those last 20%. I don't see that today we do still spend a lot of time on those 80%, and I don't think it's necessary.
You think it would be possible for a doctor in Hamburg to give a remote diagnostic session in Africa via a robot that he or she remotely controls?
Today, we are already quite advanced on this in Syria. So today we are having a lot of support in Syria, but we are not able to send international workers into Syria due to the context. So we are having people sitting remotely, sending via link. I do not know exactly how it works, but supporting on competence. So we are already there today where we are able to support, and this has been in place for a long time. We did do the same in Somalia, where people were sitting in Kenya and on video link. But today we are advancing on that technique, and it's definitely something we are already investing in. So
It's really interesting. This is a question I ask everyone. If you have 10 million euros or $10 million, what would you invest in? You have to invest in one thing.
I would invest in competence. So I would invest in training or schools to be able to certify and to increase the knowledge in supply chain management skills in the developing world. Because what we see today is that we have to enter into that to be able to make it functioning, but that they could definitely carry that on their own, and in that case not have to depend that much on foreign aid.
So knowledge transfer, that's your investment.
Yeah. Knowledge, communication and collaboration continues for me to be the highest priority. And the technology will develop, and we will have to continue to just be creative to see where we take that. But when it comes to what as long as the human person is a part of the supply chain, that's where I see that it constantly fails. When I see a failure or error, it always has the major part of it is due to communication breakdown.
So we are the weak links in the supply chain.
Yes,
human beings. So maybe we will be redundant in a few years and the machines will take over.
Well, I mean, if that could be for the 80% and I still have the 20%, then I would be happy.
So what advice would you give someone who wants to enter your field now? Let's say a student or someone who wants to join MSF or make a difference or join some other humanitarian organization. What's your best advice? It's
to travel a bit first, talk to people, read a lot about it, understand that the world can be quite different in different corners. There is the same logic in supply chain. So I do think you can bring the knowledge that you have from school or from a previous job straight into a supply chain anywhere else. But again, to come back to the human factor, it's to have to be humble, have a lot of respect, analyze, talk to people where you come, if you go, to work together and understand the context where you are in. We all have our advantages and disadvantages in each country, and you have to understand what's the external factors where you're going to work and how they are impacting the supply chain where you are.
Thank you. And my last question. Is there someone you want me to interview?
There is this really cool organization called the Logistics Cluster. It's a cluster that enters into every context where there is a lot of humanitarian activity going on to consolidate and support. The global log cluster coordinator, Stephen Cohill, I think he has a lot of really interesting topics to discuss if you would like to go further into the humanitarian supply chain.
Thank you. Stephen, I will be in touch. Thank you, Johanna, for joining Logistics.rocks. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Johanna, for that excellent expose on how you can work within Doctors Without Borders and other types of organizations working with humanitarian logistics on a day-to-day basis. Really inspiring, and I learned a lot. Next up is Helena Samshe of Globy Drones. Globy Drones is a startup working with drone technology to use in humanitarian logistics situations. It could be to distribute medical supplies or blood or something like that. And they are also using these drones to collect data about topographical details, geographical details, and the state of, for instance, a drought or a flood or something like that. And they are using artificial intelligence to help make sense of all these data that their drones are collecting. Helena is a true entrepreneur, and it's extremely inspiring to listen to her and her tremendous energy and her drive to improve for humankind using her own company. So stay tuned, load up the next chapter in your podcast player, and let's listen to and learn from Helena Samshe.